literature in the Old Testament. Usually when we begin the study of a book, we just do simple things like who's the author and when was it written and so forth. Actually, we're not real sure on the answers to that at all. Different men have been suggested as the human author of the book of Job. Of course, Job himself is suggested. Solomon has been suggested. Even King Hezekiah has been suggested as author, and some others for sure. But we just don't know who wrote it, or for that matter, when it was written. What we can say, though, is that we believe it is a historically accurate book and belongs in the inspired collection of writings that we call the Bible. In the New Testament, accreditation is given to the book of Job. Look at James chapter 5. You remember this verse, I'm sure. James chapter 5, verse 11. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. And so James gives credence to the book of Job. And then there's an interesting Old Testament reference. Look in Ezekiel chapter 14. In Ezekiel chapter 14, Ezekiel is telling God's people about judgment that they're going to suffer from God. And in Ezekiel 14, verse 14, though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, talking about the city of Jerusalem, they would deliver but their own souls by their righteousness, saith the Lord God. And so Noah and Daniel, certainly true historical figures, and Job is mentioned there by Ezekiel. So, again, we don't know for sure. We really don't have a strong idea, a positive, definite idea who wrote the book of Job, or for that matter, when it was exactly written. But we do believe that it's an inspired book. It belongs in the collection of inspired writings, and it conveys historically accurate information. So I think those are important things to note as we begin our study. We might get a little bit closer in regards to when the events happened. Again, we don't know when they were recorded necessarily, but we have kind of a strong idea as to the time period in which the events took place. We would refer to the book of Job, the events in the book of Job, as having happened in what we call the patriarchal period of time. Remember, in the time before God gave the law to Moses for the Jews, in that prior time, God was dealing with the patriarchs of the families, the heads of the families. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob were patriarchs, and they were the heads of their families. And we believe clearly that this was the same time period in which the events of Job took place. Look in chapter 1. In chapter 1, verse 5, and we'll talk a little bit more about this verse in a minute, but it was so when the days of Job's children, when his children's feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. And so, again, I want to talk a little bit more about that verse in a few minutes, but the fact that clearly indicates he, as the patriarch of the family, was serving as the priest of the family and offering sacrifices on behalf of his children. So it would definitely put it in that time period. Another thing that makes us think that it was probably in that era is in regards to the longevity of Job's life. Look in chapter 42. In chapter 42 at verse 16. So all of this has happened and it's all come full circle, and Job is restored to his family and his possessions, and he had children. And it says in verse 16 of chapter 42, after this lived Job 140 years and saw his sons and his sons' sons even 4 generations. So he had already lived long enough to have many children and lots of physical wealth. He lost it all. He got it back. And after he got it back, he lived for 140 more years. So that would make you think that that's in that same early time period. And so patriarchal period, pretty early. A lot of commentators think that Job was probably contemporary to the time of Abraham. And actually the events in the book of Job may convey events that are some of the earliest recorded events in the Bible. Wait.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it says that he saw his children in 4 generations, and it was 140 years to live longer. All his other children have taken away. So these are new children that he's produced, and he's seen them in the 4th generation. And so you would think that these kids were having kids early. So maybe like in the 20s or 30s, they were having them early. Versus like in the days of Noah and Methuselah, they would be like
They were older.
300 years, and then they'd have their first son or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I can see that more than the days of Abraham.
Yeah. That's what's generally, that's the general view. Again, it really can't be too much more specific than what we just have been in regards to trying to pin down. So we don't know when it was written. It could have been written by a later historian who was inspired to write the events. Some have suggested, one of the Solomon or Hezekiah. So that would have been way later than when the events actually happened. So what we're talking about is, when did the events happen? We can get a little bit of a handle on that. We don't know when the events were recorded, but get a little bit of a handle on when they took place. Other thoughts or comments here? Wayne?
I read that there are some Sumerian texts that are pretty close to quotations that are found of Job, and so that they put it around even 25 to 3,000.
Even maybe a little earlier.
BC,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And it would fit with the animals that are there, the behemoth, and the Leviathan, possible dinosaur.
Yeah.
Creatures
Yeah.
would have been there.
That's interesting. So I don't know if Wayne piqued your interest there, but before we get done with this, Clayton can help us out on this. Before we get done with this, we'll talk some about dinosaurs, maybe even before we get done with the book of Job. All right. Okay. So what's the purpose of the book? So we're going to study the book of Job. Why was the book of Job written? What does it do for us? And some people would say that the book of Job deals with a question. It's an ages long question. It's forever question. Why do good people suffer? Job, as we'll see here in a minute, was a very good man, and yet he suffered horribly. Why do good people suffer? And some people say, well, the book of Job was written to address that question. I actually would say, I don't think that's really totally true, because that question is never really answered. That's a question on people's mind. It was back then. It is now. We have that question in our mind. We know the question existed back then. And Job asked the question over and over again. He's going to ask, why is all this happening to me? But he never really gets a full answer to that question. And so I think maybe a better way of describing Job is to answer the question, how should righteous people suffer when they do suffer? Okay? And that lesson is definitely described and explained. So Job was a righteous man, and he suffered horribly. So we're trying to live right. We're trying to live right. We're trying to live for God. And yet sometimes bad things happen to good people. Good people suffer. When you suffer, how do you deal with the suffering when it comes? Suffering is a reality of living in this present existence. When you suffer, how do you deal with that? And the book of Job definitely addresses that issue. All right? Thoughts or questions, anybody? All right.
I'm glad that
Aaron.
you kind of preface that and change the idea about going from good people to righteous.
Yeah.
Because really that's what this is about.
He-
good
he's-
person. He is righteous.
He's a righteous man.
He's doing
And
all
that's a
the
really
right
good point, because that's not the same. Those are not synonymous.
things.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Wayne?
Yeah, I like to take the tack that what Job was written to dispel the false teaching of that day, that the false concept of that day, that righteous people don't suffer, unrighteous people do suffer.
Yeah.
And that's even gone down into our own age.
These people still believe that.
You must be living right because you've done this.
That thought has prevailed through the centuries, and as you say, it still exists today. If bad things are happening to you, it's probably because God's mad at you and you're not living right. And that idea has been pervasive throughout history, and it still exists today. And yet the Bible is so plain to deny that is a true thing. That's just not true. And so I think Wayne's observation is exactly right also. Again, suffering is not, the book certainly proves to us that suffering is not always the result of personal sin. You know, sometimes suffering is the result of personal sin. And we could illustrate that in all number of ways. But if I go out and get drunk tonight and plow my car into a telephone pole or a tree and end up paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of my life, I've brought a lot of suffering on my sin has brought a lot of suffering on myself. And so sometimes suffering is the result of my personal sins. Other times it's not. So if I get drunk tonight and I get out on the highway and I hit another guy and I escape without just minor injuries, but I leave that guy paralyzed for the rest of his life. Well, he's suffering, but it wasn't his sin that caused his suffering. So there's just not a one-to-one correlation between personal sin and personal suffering. And certainly we'll be talking a lot about that as we go through the book of Job. And then I think also one of the things that we'll highlight as we study is that suffering in hard times can actually accomplish beneficial things for us in the spiritual realm. And I think we'll see that in Job's case. I think we see, that at the end he understood things better than he did at the beginning. But I think we have all probably seen that, had personal experience in our own lives or the lives of others in which, they went through something hard and they ended up stronger. Usually, if you're going to go through something hard, you're probably not going to be left the same at the end of that. If you go through something hard, it's either going to destroy you or make you stronger. Very unlikely that you'll just be the same. Of course, what we want to do is, on the positive side, we want to come out stronger than we were when it all began. Okay. So all of those thoughts, just sort of by way of introduction. Any questions or comments anybody have? Aaron?
I just say, the more I think about it and the more that I look deeply into Job, I wonder if it's the best book in the Bible about faithfulness and faithfulness on both sides. God's faithfulness to the righteous and the importance of the righteous to remain faithful to God in difficult situations.
Yeah. I had a note here. Let's see if I can find it. I already went past it. One author pointed out, God is deserving of our praise simply on the basis of who He is, apart from the blessings that He bestows. God deserves to be praised. Doesn't matter how He's dealing with us at the moment. He deserves to be praised. And that's probably a lesson we need to learn too, because we praise God when things are going well and we thank Him, but then we kind of get down and depressed and gripe when things are not going well. And God deserves our praise in good days and bad, and we should remember that. And I think Job learned that too. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Wayne?
Just one short one. I would encourage everybody to, as you go through the book of Job, write down the teaching that Job understands as we go through this book. Because we look at this as a time of virtual, almost no revelation given to man. Just very limited. We call this the Starlight era. Alexander, I think, Campbell called this the starlight era, the patriarchal age. But if you write down the things that Job understands as he relates his suffering, he knows, for instance, there's a Redeemer who is going to redeem him, and he knows that he has a place reserved in heaven for him as we go through the book. And so it's just phenomenal, the growth and development of the man as he goes through the points of suffering that we see recorded in this book.
Good observation. Good point. Kelly?
I think the book of Job is like one of the most unique books in the Bible. Number one, we get such a look at the spiritual realm between God and sin. And number two, do you think new Bible students have a hard time deciphering on, because we're given such lengthy text of what the friends say.
Yeah.
And like new Bible students, they probably have a hard time saying, well, this was inspired or this wasn't inspired. And it's a little bit of a unique book.
It really is. I don't know if you could all hear what Kelly was saying. So there's long passages, Job's comforters will come, and they go through a really long development of their argument. And their argument is basically, Job, you're suffering because you've got sin in your life, and you need to admit it and get rid of it and get right with God, because all of this is coming to you because of your sins. And they go through a long development of that. And then, of course, Job just adamantly denies it. So all those long sections where the friends are speaking, for instance, that what they're saying is not inspired. It's not true. The record of it is inspired, but the statements they're making themselves are not inspired. They're not right. And so, if you're not kind of perceptive to the context as it develops, you could end up with wrong conclusions. I think that's true. So we'll do our best to sort of decipher that. Anybody else thoughts? All right, let's read the first few verses here. Job, chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the east. And his sons went and feasted in their houses every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. All right, so Job lived, he lived somewhere in the east. He was the greatest of all the men of the east. Now, it actually mentions the land of Uz. Right there, the first phrase, there was a man in the land of Uz. So, again, put those two things. He's in Uz. He's a great man of the east. So we would think east of the principal places where Bible history takes place. There's an interesting reference in the book of Lamentations. Although we hardly ever reference Lamentations, do we? But in Lamentations chapter 4, verse 21, there's a quote about the daughters of Edom that dwell in the land of Uz. So, of course, the Edomites were the descendants of Esau. And the land of Edom was southeast of the Dead Sea. So if you're looking at Canaan land and the Dead Sea and Edom to the southeast of that may define where the land of Uz was. He was a man, he had a lot, he was greatly blessed. 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, a very large household. Physically, he was very blessed, the greatest man of the East. And so that's not just some human estimation as to his wealth and prosperity. That's inspired. That's an inspired commendation of his wealth. But more, I think for us, surely the thing more impressive is the way his character is described. perfect and upright. He feared God. He hated evil. Just skip ahead a few verses. Look at the end of verse 8. When God is speaking to Satan, he says to Satan, he's a perfect and upright man, one that fears God and eschews evil. Have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth. That's high praise, isn't it? And again, that's not praise coming from men whose judgment might be kind of, influenced. Maybe they're prejudiced, or they like a guy or they don't like a guy, or this is coming from God. God says, have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth. And so that's very impressive. As we said earlier there in verse 5, he served as the spiritual leader of his family, offering sacrifices on behalf of his children. I've always thought that right at the end of verse 5 is an interesting expression. He's offering these sacrifices because he says, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. So Job was a fella. He's a great man. God holds him in highest estimation. None like him. And Job's approach to things spiritually is, take the safe course. Be absolutely safe. I'm offering these sacrifices not because he said, my sons have sinned, now I'm going to have to offer sacrifices. He says, it may be, or possibly is so, that my sons have sinned, and he's offering sacrifices. So, I think that's a good principle there. Be sure, take the safe course. Wait.
So, but I think also you can derive from that how much care and consideration he has for others. So I'm worried about my children. I'm worried that they may have done something to upset my Creator. And so I want to offer a sacrifice to protect them.
Yeah.
So I'm very concerned about their spiritual well-being.
Yeah, I think exactly right. Exactly right. So, again, you just simply can't say enough good about Job. He's just a great man. As Aaron said earlier, he's not just a good man, he's a righteous man, and God holds him in high esteem. And he's very physically prosperous. He's a wealthy man, the greatest man of the East, greatest of all the men of the East, it says there at the end of verse 3. So he's very physically prosperous in addition to his great spiritual character. All right, so that brings us to a set of verses that's very curious, and there's more questions than answers here. Look at verse 6 beginning. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thy hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. I'm pretty sure you're just like me. A big question arises about Satan. So the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And in this context, you would have to think that this is a spiritual scene. This is not a physical scene on earth. This is in the spiritual realm. The sons of God, most commentators would imagine in this context, I don't think that expression always means, but I think in this context it probably means angels came to present themselves before God. And Satan was with them. Satan came with them. Now, how is that? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. we talk about the origin of Satan. Where did Satan come from? I think there's probably a basis for assuming that Satan is a fallen angel. I don't think Satan was created evil. God is light. In him is no darkness at all. 1 John chapter 1 says, God, it wouldn't be in the character of God to create such a horrible evil being as Satan. So you have to think that Satan, we've talked about Satan before and had sermons and lessons about, you have to think that Satan was probably created good but fell. Maybe. I mean, I think there's probably some basis for speculating that he was an angel who left, the New Testament, Peter talks about angels who left their first estate. Some people try to build a whole big story about this that we can't verify in the Bible at all. There was a rebellion in heaven. Satan was the leader of the rebellion. God cast them down. Peter says they're reserved in chains for final judgment. Satan was the leader of that rebellion in heaven. We don't know any of those details. But again, I would argue, I think there has to be true that he was created good and fell. A fallen angel, maybe. Is he with does he come into the presence of God in the company of angels? It appears to be so. How that could be so, we're at a total loss on that, Wade.
Wayne brought out a good point a long time ago, and it's just really, really stuck with me. So, I personally don't believe that Satan could appear in the presence of God in heaven. I don't see how God would allow him into the pearly gates. But I think that the scene could be on earth. Because he just said, where have you been? He said, I've been wandering throughout the earth. This scene could be on earth. And God could be,
Well, the only thing about that is that these beings are spiritual beings. God's a spiritual being, Satan's a spiritual being.
But God comes to earth, and we know the spiritual beings come to earth.
I'm not willing
to this in the physical realm, physical place.
This is something I think took place in the spiritual realm. Wayne?
Same wording is used in Genesis 6. The sons of God saw the children of men, that they were beautiful, they took them as wives. Well, that flies in the face of Matthew that says that in the kingdom will be like angels who don't have the sexual capacity.
Yeah.
So there's two possibilities. Either these are angels, or they are the sons of God, those who worship God, those who serve God.
In Genesis 6, I think it is those who worship God. And that's why I said I don't think that expression always means angels. Because I think in Genesis 6 it does not.
There are times in the book that it does.
Yeah.
Job 38,
Yeah.
36, maybe. But I think here it's those that worship God, and Satan comes in among them. The same thing happens with us. The sons of God come to worship, and Satan comes in among us as well. And so I don't have a problem with this being the children of God, those that serve God, and not. I don't know anything that would make it have to be a spiritual being.
Yeah. There was this, but what? Let me make sure. I want to confirm this though. This conversation between God and Satan, this is happening in the spiritual realm. This is not something where I could say, I was there, man. I was there, and I saw God talking to Satan. I don't think any physical man could have been privy to this conversation that took place between. And so how does that even happen? I don't know. There's just a lot of questions here that there aren't answers to. I don't know how that conversation, how it could have even generated, how it could have been so to take place. Did it take place? Yeah, certainly. This conversation between God and Satan certainly took place. There's just no doubt about that. All of the details surrounding the circumstances of that, I think we're pretty much in the dark. Sarah?
It makes me think about Ephesians 6:12, where he talks about the spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. There's realms that I think we don't know.
Yeah, we're very limited here in our perceptions. We just perceive physical things, and we try to be spiritually minded, but we don't know what goes on in those realms. I don't think. Wayne?
Yeah, I think this is a glimpse into the spiritual struggle that exists between God and man, well, between God and Satan over the souls of men.
Yeah.
And I think it shows that, or gives us this glimpse into that struggle where the children of God, those that serve God, come together to worship Him. Satan comes among them, and then God and Satan have this conversation. I think that even goes on today.
Yeah.
Have you considered my servant Matt? You know, and so this gives us, I think, a glimpse into that spiritual realm that is obviously between Satan and the adversary, as he's called here, the adversary and God.
I think that's right. This is sort of confirmation of 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. This is one illustration of that principle that covers us all. Satan wants to devour us all. He's stalking about as a roaring lion, wanting to devour you and me. I mean, his nature in that regard has not changed. We have information about him going after one man here, but that's not the only man he ever went after. He goes after all. He goes after all men. And you know, we've made this point before, which is kind of scary. When you think about the world at large, Satan's already got almost everybody. For the very small minority of people in the world who are trying to live faithfully for God, Satan's got all of his energies directed at us, because he already got the others where he wants them. He doesn't have to expend his energies on them. He's putting all his energies toward us. Aaron?
I think part of the story, though, too, in talking about these heavenly places and realms, is to show us the sovereignty of God and His powerfulness. And Satan is not sovereign. And in this passage, and as you just showed us in Peter, is that he is not omnipresent. God is. Satan is not. While Satan is powerful, there are immense differences
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
in who God is and His sovereignty and power, and what He allows Satan to have power. Not to get into the verses further that you're about to get into, but I think that's laying down some of the framework and foundation for the Scriptures.
I think so too. And one of the things that we see here, and we'll talk about it here, but Satan only able to do what God lets him do. So he's limited. You know, God, as you say, sovereign, all-powerful, in control. He allows some things to happen, but even Satan is only able to do what God allows him to do. And it's clear that God has restrictions on him. And so, what would you say about us? Well, I think you'd say the same thing. You know, in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, no temptation has taken you but such as is common to man. God will not allow you to be tempted above that you're able, but will with the temptation make a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. Wouldn't that be the same thing here? God is not going to let temptations come upon you that you can't handle. You know, sometimes people say, I couldn't help myself. Yeah, you can. You can help yourself. God won't let you be tempted above your ability to resist. So God limits Satan. We see it plainly here, and it's still true. Aaron?
Romans 8:28, we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who called according to His purpose.
Yeah, exactly right. All right. So, God said, have you considered my servant Job? And the answer to that question on Satan's part is, yes, I have, and he's driving me crazy. I have considered Job, and I can't get at him. I just can't get him to sin. Because you have built a hedge around him. And he asked the question, and I don't really like the way the King James translates it so well. there in the last part of verse 9, Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for nothing or for naught? And the question basically is, do you think Job would serve you if he wasn't making out so well? That's the question. So it's not, does Job serve you for nothing now? The question is, would Job serve you if he wasn't getting something for it? Would Job if you took all his blessings away, you think Job would keep serving you? Would Job serve you for nothing? I don't think so, God. I think the only reason Job is being such a good man is because you have blessed him so abundantly. So he is basically saying that Job is selfish, that he's serving God selfishly, that he's self-centered, and that he's only serving God because God is blessing him so abundantly. And the implication is that he wouldn't serve you, he wouldn't worship you, he wouldn't praise you, God, just because of who you are. Only reason he's serving you and praising you and being obedient is because of what he's getting out of it. So he's basically, he's attacking Job's character, and basically he is saying to God, men wouldn't praise you if you weren't just showering blessings on. If you took all the blessings away, they'd quit praising you, and Job will too, by the way. So I think somebody said Satan was trying to prove that there's no such thing as unselfish piety. That if you're a religious man, you serve God, you're not doing it unselfishly. You're doing it selfishly because you're getting good out of it. And that's what basically men only do what's right when it's profitable for them to do what's right. That's Satan's accusation. And so he's attacking Job, but he's also attacking God himself. And so God accepts the challenge. Okay, check it out. I think you'll find out that there is such a thing as selfless piety, that there is such a thing as non-covetous righteousness. Go ahead and put him to the test. But here in this first episode, he says, don't touch him. He says, all that he hath, put forth, the Lord said to Satan, all that he hath is in thine power, only upon himself put not thy hand. And so you can attack everything he has, just don't attack his person. And we're going to see the main part of what he's talking about there is his physical body and his physical health. And so you can do that. We just got a few more minutes. Let's read to the end of the chapter, and we may have to pick up our conversation there next week as well. So at verse 13, right at the end of verse 12, Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. There was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alive to tell thee. And while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. And while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. And while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Then Job arose and rent his mantle, shaved his head, and fell down upon the earth and worshipped, and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So Satan is one bad being. To to heap all of this upon Job in a day. So God gives him license, and he takes full advantage of the license he's been given. And in immediate succession, all of his physical possessions, all of his animals are taken, all of the physical wealth that he had acquired, and then, of course, his own children are taken from him. And so everything that he valued has been taken from him. How mean can you be? So we're going to kill all the servants, but we're going to leave one alive so he can get back and give the horrible report of what's happened. And then the next episode, all the servants have been killed. We're going to leave one guy alive to get back and tell the horrible report. In every instance, that's the way it happened. You know, Satan, you got to think Satan is just trying to just drive this dagger in just as deep as he can drive it, you know, see how bad it can be. And so Job reacts to that by tearing his robe, shaving his head, falling to the ground. But he worships. He still praises God. Naked I came out of my mother's womb, naked shall I return. The Lord gave, the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You know, that's a famous expression, isn't it? You know, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Sometimes you hear that at funerals and at cemeteries, and it's a true statement from the mouth of Job. And of course, the key there is the last verse of the chapter. In all of this, so all of this, we're talking about receiving the reports in immediate succession, receiving all these reports about all the calamity that has befallen him. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly, which is really incredible. So at the start of the chapter, he was a perfect and upright man. One feared God, he eschewed evil. God said in verse 8, have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him in the earth? This reaction of Job here, I think, confirms those estimations that were made of him earlier. On the other hand, did you have something, Aaron?
I would just say real quick, Revised English Version commentary looking at Revelation chapter 12:10 about the accuser that you were talking about here in these verses of Proverbs. It says this, I think it's very interesting. Satan questions our motives, our character, and worthiness, just as he did to Job.
Good point. I think that's a good point. Exactly. Wade?
No, I was thinking that it made a reference to the Chaldeans here.
Do what?
There's a reference made here to the Chaldeans.
Yeah.
In verse 17. So the Chaldeans actually are references to the Babylonians. I think those are the same group.
Yeah, it's a region, though. It's not the same time. This was not the time of the Babylonians.
But it's still the people from that same...
From that region, Chaldea.
So that tells you two things. It tells you, one, that Job lived close to that region.
Yeah.
And also, those people are mentioned later on when Hezekiah takes them and shows them all his riches and treasure.
That was the time of the Babylonians then. But the Babylonians were in the land of Chaldea. So it's a region. It's a region, yeah. Okay. Josh?
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, it's interesting that Satan was given power to, his life's in your hands. But then he's working behind the scenes, so he gets the Chaldeans, the Sabians, and what's described as the fire of God to burn up some of his livestock. So Satan is using people and other
Natural disasters.
Yeah. So it's just interesting how Satan was working in the background to accomplish getting at Job. He didn't just go himself and strike him or strike his family. He used other things in the natural world.
Interesting. Good point. Good point. Anything else? Wayne?
Yeah, in Genesis 11:31, it talks about Abraham and his son and all those that they went to get Abraham's wife, and they went together from the Ur of the Chaldees. So the land of
The Chaldeans.
Ur of the Chaldees.
Yeah.
Chaldees is the ancient name for the Babylonians.
Yeah.
This was not the Babylonian time, as you pointed out.
Right.
Certainly the ancient name for the Babylonians would have been the Chaldees.
Right. Exactly right. All right. Thanks, everybody.